Your phone vibrates. You glance at the screen. A voicemail notification. You recognize the number immediately. It belongs to someone you loved, someone you lost, someone who died 3 days ago. You stare at the notification, your hands shaking. You tell yourself it must be a mistake, an old message that somehow resurfaced, a glitch in the system. But the timestamp says it was left 10 minutes ago. You press play, and you hear their voice. Not a recording from the past, a new message, speaking to you, saying things they could not have known before they died. The message ends. Silence fills your ear, and you are left holding a phone that has just delivered the impossible. This is not fantasy. This is not folklore. These are documented cases of people who received voicemails from the dead. Messages that arrived after the sender had been declared deceased, calls that came from numbers that should have been disconnected, voices that spoke when the body that produced them was already cold. What you are about to hear are real accounts of people who listened to messages from beyond, messages that defy explanation, messages that leave us questioning the boundary between life and death, between the possible and the impossible. 7 cases, 7 voicemails, no answers. In September of 2008, a train derailment occurred in Chatsworth, California. A commuter train collided with a freight train, killing 25 people and injuring over 100 others. The collision happened at 4:22 in the afternoon. Among the dead was a man named Charles Peck, 59 years old, who had been traveling to visit his family. His body was found in the wreckage the following day, identified through personal effects and later confirmed by medical examination. The coroner estimated that Charles Peck died on impact or within minutes of the collision. But in the hours after the crash, something impossible happened. Charles Peck's fiancée, Andrea Katz, received a phone call from his number. The call came at 4:42 in the afternoon, 20 minutes after the collision. She answered, but the line was silent. She heard nothing. No voice, no background noise, just dead air. The call disconnected after a few seconds. She tried calling back, but the phone went straight to voicemail. Over the next several hours, Andrea received more calls from Charles' number. Each time, the same result. Silence. No words, no indication of life on the other end. She grew increasingly desperate, hoping that somehow Charles had survived and was trying to reach her but could not speak. She contacted emergency services and informed them that she was receiving calls from his phone. Rescue workers used the information to triangulate the location of his cell phone, hoping it would lead them to survivors. The calls continued, not just to Andrea, but to other family members as well. Charles's son received multiple calls from his father's number. His brother received calls. Each call was the same: silence, connection, disconnection. In total, 35 calls were placed from Charles Peck's phone in the 11 hours following the crash. The last call was made at 3:28 in the morning, nearly 11 hours after the collision. When rescue workers finally located Charles Peck's body the next day, his cell phone was found in his pocket. The phone was examined by investigators. The call log confirmed that 35 outgoing calls had been made to his family members during the night. But Charles Peck had been dead for hours before the first call was placed. Medical evidence confirmed he could not have survived the impact. His injuries were catastrophic and immediately fatal. Experts suggested that the phone, damaged in the crash, may have malfunctioned and auto-dialed numbers in his contact list. But this explanation does not account for the specificity of the calls. The phone only dialed family members. It did not call random numbers or repeat the same number endlessly. It called his fiancée, his son, his brother, people he would have wanted to reach, people he would have called if he were able. Andrea Katz later said that she believed Charles was trying to reach her, trying to say goodbye.
She kept the voicemails, even though they contained only silence. The absence of sound became, for her, a presence, a sign that he had tried, that in some way, through some mechanism we do not understand, he had reached out from beyond death to let her know he was there. The calls remain unexplained. The phone records are real. The timestamps are verified. 35 calls from a dead man's phone, 35 attempts to communicate, and 35 moments of silence where a voice should have been. What compels a phone to dial numbers after its owner has died? Is it random electrical impulses firing through damaged circuits? Or is it something else, something that lingers in the device, an echo of intention, a fragment of will that persists even after the body has stopped? Not all voicemails from the dead are silent. Some contain words, messages that were never meant to be heard, or perhaps meant to be heard only after death. In June of 2011, a woman named Emily in Manchester, England, lost her mother to cancer. Her mother, Margaret, had been ill for several months. The family knew the end was near. On the morning of June 12th, Margaret passed away peacefully in the hospital, with her family at her bedside. Emily was there. She held her mother's hand as she took her last breath. The time of death was recorded at 6:17 in the morning.
Emily returned home later that day, exhausted and grief-stricken. She tried to rest, but could not sleep. At approximately 2 in the afternoon, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The call was coming from her mother's mobile number. Emily's first thought was that someone at the hospital had found the phone and was calling to return it. She answered. What she heard was her mother's voice, not a recording, not an old message. A new voicemail, left just moments before. Her mother's voice, weak but clear, saying her name, Emily. That was all. Just her name, spoken softly, almost as a whisper. Then the sound of breathing, slow and labored, and then silence. The voicemail ended. Emily stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. She replayed the message, her mother's voice again. Emily. The breathing. The silence. She checked the timestamp. The voicemail had been left at 1:53 in the afternoon, nearly 8 hours after her mother had died. Emily called her father, who was still at the hospital handling arrangements. She asked if anyone had accessed her mother's phone. Her father said the phone was in her mother's belongings, still in the hospital room, untouched. No one had used it. Emily told him about the voicemail. Her father was silent for a long moment. Then he asked her to play it for him. She held her phone up to his phone and let him listen. He heard it, his wife's voice, saying their daughter's name. The family retrieved Margaret's phone from the hospital. They checked the call log. The phone showed an outgoing call to Emily's number at 1:53 in the afternoon, but no one had touched the phone. It had been in a sealed bag with her other belongings since her death. The hospital staff confirmed this. The bag had not been opened. Emily kept the voicemail. She played it for friends and other family members. Everyone recognized Margaret's voice. Some said it sounded exactly as she had sounded in her final days, weak from illness, but still her. Others said it sounded different, distant, as if the voice was coming from far away. Emily noticed something else. In the background of the voicemail, behind her mother's voice and the breathing, there was a faint sound, a low hum, almost mechanical, that she could not identify. Skeptics suggested the voicemail was a delayed message, something Margaret had recorded before her death that only sent hours later due to a network error. But Margaret had been too weak to use her phone in the days before her death. She had barely been able to speak, and the message said only Emily's name, nothing else. Why would she record such a brief, incomplete message? Emily believes the voicemail was her mother's way of saying goodbye, a final message sent from wherever she had gone. She listens to it sometimes, on difficult days,
when the grief feels too heavy. She hears her name spoken in her mother's voice, and for a moment, her mother is with her again. The voicemail exists. It is saved on Emily's phone. It can be played. It can be heard. But where it came from and how it was sent 8 hours after death, no one can say. When you hear the voice of someone you watched die speaking to you hours later, what do you believe? Do you accept the rational explanations, the glitches and delays, the technical possibilities? Or do you trust what you feel, what you know, what the voice itself tells you? There are cases where the voicemail is not a comfort, but a source of fear, where the message is not a goodbye, but something far more disturbing. In March of 2014, a man named David in Ohio lost his best friend Nathan in a car accident. He was 32 years old. He was driving home from work late at night when his car left the road and struck a tree. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The accident happened at approximately 11:45 at night on March 8th. David received the news the following morning from Nathan's family. He was devastated. Nathan had been his closest friend since childhood. They spoke almost every day. David spent the day in shock, unable to process the loss. That evening at around 7 o'clock, David's phone rang. The caller ID showed Nathan's name and number. David answered without thinking, his heart racing, hoping irrationally that the news had been a mistake, that Nathan was alive. There was no voice on the other end, only static, thick, heavy static that filled David's ear. He said Nathan's name. No response, just the static, constant and unchanging. He listened for nearly a minute, waiting for something, anything. Then the call ended. David checked his phone. The call log confirmed that Nathan's number had called him. The call had lasted 1 minute and 12 seconds. David tried calling Nathan's number back. It rang twice and then went to voicemail. Nathan's voice on the greeting, recorded months ago, cheerful and casual. David hung up without leaving a message. An hour later, another call from Nathan's number. David hesitated but answered. This time there was no static. There was breathing. Slow, raspy, uneven breathing. David said Nathan's name again. The breathing continued. It sounded labored, as if whoever was breathing was struggling, in pain. David felt a cold dread settle over him. He asked who was there. The breathing stopped. Silence. Then a voice, faint, distorted, barely audible. It said, "Help me." David dropped the phone. He stared at it on the floor, his hands shaking. The call was still connected. He could hear the silence through the speaker. He picked up the phone and ended the call. He sat in his apartment, unable to move, unable to think. The voice had sounded like Nathan, but Nathan was dead. David had seen the photos of the accident. The car was destroyed. No one could have survived. Over the next 3 days, David received 6 more calls from Nathan's number. Each call was different, sometimes static, sometimes breathing. Once he heard what sounded like distant screaming, muffled and distorted. Another time he heard a voice that might have been Nathan's, saying words he could not understand, speaking in a rapid, panicked tone. David stopped answering the calls. He let them go to voicemail. But the voicemails were always the same: silence, or static, or sounds that made no sense. David contacted Nathan's family and asked if anyone had access to Nathan's phone. They told him the phone had been destroyed in the accident. It was in pieces, recovered from the wreckage, useless. The hospital confirmed that Nathan's number had been disconnected the day after Nathan's death. The account was closed. The number should not have been able to make calls. But the calls continued. David blocked the number. The calls still came through. He changed his own number. Within a week, he received another call from Nathan's number on his new phone, a number that Nathan could not have known because he had only just activated it. David eventually sought help from a priest, though he was not religious. He felt the calls were not technical errors, but something else, something wrong. The priest visited David's apartment and blessed it. The calls stopped after that. David never heard from Nathan's number again. But the voicemails remained on his phone. He could not bring himself to delete them. He saved them, though he never listened to them again. The voice saying, "Help me," haunted him. If it was Nathan, then Nathan had been in pain, had been afraid, had needed help that David could not give. If it was not Nathan, then something had used his friend's voice, his friend's number to reach him, and David did not know which possibility was worse. The calls are documented. The phone records exist. Calls from a disconnected number, from a destroyed phone to a man whose friend was dead. Calls that contained voices and sounds that should not have been there. And no one, not the phone company, not technical experts, not anyone, could explain how they were possible. When a voice from beyond asks for help, what can you do? The dead are beyond our reach. Their suffering, if they suffer, is in a place we cannot access. The calls are evidence that something persists. But evidence of what? A soul in torment? A glitch in the network of reality? Or something we have no words for? There are also cases where the voicemail arrives not immediately after death, but years later. Messages that appear without warning, long after the mourning has ended, long after the loss has been accepted. In August of 2016, a woman named Rachel in London received a voicemail from her grandmother, who had passed away in 2009. Rachel had been very close to her grandmother, a woman named Dorothy. Dorothy had raised Rachel after her parents divorced. They had spoken almost every day until Dorothy's death from a stroke at the age of 78. Rachel had kept her grandmother's phone number saved in her contacts, even though the number had long been reassigned to someone else. She could not bring herself to delete it. Seeing her grandmother's name in her phone was a small comfort, a reminder of the connection they had shared. On the afternoon of August 14th, Rachel was at work when her phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. She checked the screen. The voicemail was from her grandmother's old number. Rachel assumed it was a misdial from whoever
Now had the number. She played the message out of curiosity. What she heard made her blood run cold. It was her grandmother's voice, clear and unmistakable. Dorothy spoke in her usual tone, warm and affectionate. "Hello, darling. I just wanted to call and tell you I'm thinking of you. I miss our chats. Call me when you have a moment. I love you." The message ended. Rachel sat at her desk, unable to move. She played the message again. Her grandmother's voice, the same inflections, the same warmth, the same words Dorothy would have said when she was alive. Rachel checked the timestamp. The voicemail had been left 20 minutes ago, 7 years after her grandmother's death. Rachel called the number back. A man answered. He sounded annoyed. Rachel apologized and asked if he had just called her. The man said no, he had not made any calls that day. Rachel asked how long he had owned the number. He said he had it for about 5 years. Rachel thanked him and hung up. She went to her phone carrier and asked for the call records. The carrier confirmed that a voicemail had been deposited into her mailbox from that number at the time indicated, but the man who owned the number insisted he had not called her. Rachel asked if there was any way an old voicemail could resurface years later. The carrier representative said it was theoretically possible if there was a database error, but highly unlikely after 7 years. Rachel played the voicemail for her family. Her mother, Dorothy's daughter, listened and began to cry. She confirmed it was her mother's voice. Rachel's aunt listened and said the same. They all heard it, Dorothy's voice, speaking a new message 7 years after her death. Rachel researched similar cases and found others who had experienced the same phenomenon.
voicemails from deceased loved ones arriving years later with no technical explanation. Some believed these were messages that had been lost in the network and finally delivered. Others believed they were signs from the afterlife, evidence that the dead could still reach out. Rachel chose to believe the latter. She kept the voicemail and listened to it whenever she missed her grandmother. She felt it was a gift, a reminder that love persists even after death, that the bond between them had not been severed by the grave. But the question remains, if the message was lost in the system for 7 years, why did it sound like a new message addressing Rachel in the present? Why did Dorothy say she missed their chats when they had not spoken in 7 years? The words suggested immediacy, recent contact, ongoing relationship, not the words of a message recorded long ago. The voicemail exists. It has been heard by multiple people. It is Dorothy's voice, but how it arrived 7 years after her death and why it arrived when it did cannot be explained by any known system or logic. Time does not move the same way for the dead as it does for the living. Perhaps a message sent 7 years ago from the perspective of the sender arrives 7 years later from the perspective of the receiver. Or perhaps time is irrelevant and the dead can reach through it as easily as we reach through space. In some cases, the voicemail does not come from a loved one, but from a stranger, someone the recipient never knew, someone whose death was distant and unrelated, and yet the connection is made. In February of 2013, a teenager named Jessica in Pennsylvania began receiving voicemails from an unknown number. The calls came late at night, usually between 2 and 3 in the morning. Jessica's phone would not ring. The calls would go directly to voicemail. Each morning, she would wake up to find a new voicemail from the same unknown number. At first, the voicemails were silent. No words, no sounds, just the faint hiss of an open line. Jessica assumed it was a prank or a wrong number. She ignored them. But the voicemails continued. Every night, same number, same silence. After a week, the voicemails changed. They began to contain sounds, soft crying, a woman's voice sobbing quietly. Jessica listened, disturbed but unsure what to do. She tried calling the number back. It did not ring. The line was dead. She tried texting the number. The messages did not deliver. The crying continued for nights afterward. Then, on the 10th night, the voicemail contained words. The woman's voice, choked with tears, said, "Please, please help me. I don't know where I am." The message ended. Jessica sat at her desk, unable to move. She played the message again. Laura's voice, choked with tears. It was more specific this time, not just crying, but a plea for help. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Laura had been missing for 3 weeks. No one knew where she was, and yet her voice was reaching Jessica from an unknown place. Jessica showed the voicemails to her parents. They contacted the police. The police traced the number. It belonged to Laura, a woman who had been reported missing 3 weeks ago from a town 50 miles away. Laura was 23 years old. She had disappeared after leaving work one evening. Her car was found abandoned on the side of a highway. There was no signs of struggle, no evidence of what had happened to her. The police contacted Jessica and asked to hear the voicemails. Jessica played them. The officers recognized the voice. It matched recordings of Laura from her family. But Laura's phone had never been found. The number calling Jessica was Laura's cell phone number, but the phone itself was missing. The voicemails continued even after the police became involved. Each night, a new message, Laura's voice, sometimes crying, sometimes whispering, sometimes screaming. She begged for help. She said she was trapped. She said it was dark. She said she was alone, but she never said where she was. 2 weeks after the voicemails began, Laura's body was found in a wooded area near where her car was abandoned. She had been murdered. The coroner estimated she had been dead for at least 3 weeks, meaning she had died before the voicemails to Jessica began. The police investigated further. They examined Jessica's call records. The calls from Laura's number were real. They had been placed from Laura's phone, but Laura's phone was never recovered. It was not with her body. It was not in her car. It was never found. After Laura's body was discovered, the voicemails stopped. Jessica never received another call from that number. The police had no explanation for how the calls were made. Laura was dead when the voicemails were sent. Her phone was missing, and yet her voice reached Jessica night after night, pleading for help. Jessica struggled with the experience. She felt guilty, as if she should have been able to do something. But what could she have done? The voicemails gave no location, no clues, just fear and desperation. Jessica attended Laura's funeral, though she had never met her in life. She felt connected to her, bound by the voicemails that had come from beyond death. The case remains unsolved. Laura's killer was never found. Her phone was never recovered. And the voicemails, recordings of a dead woman's voice calling for help, remain saved on Jessica's phone as evidence of something that should not have been possible. Why did Laura's voice reach Jessica? Why that particular girl in that particular town? Was it random, or was there a reason? Did Laura, in some state beyond death, reach out to anyone who might listen? Or was Jessica chosen, selected by forces we cannot comprehend, to receive messages from a murdered woman's phone? The voicemails are real. The police confirmed them. The voice was identified, but the mechanism by which they were sent and the purpose they served remain unknown. Not all voicemails from the dead are pleas for help or messages of love. Some are mundane, ordinary, so normal that they are almost more disturbing in their normalcy. In May of 2015, a man named Stephen in Texas lost his father, Robert, to a heart attack. Robert was 67 years old. He collapsed while mowing his lawn and died before the ambulance arrived. Stephen and his father had a good relationship, though they were not particularly close. They spoke on the phone once or twice a month, usually about practical matters, bills, car repairs, the weather. 3 days after Robert's funeral, Stephen received a voicemail from his father's number. Stephen assumed it was someone from his father's phone plan calling to discuss canceling the account. He played the message.
It was his father's voice. Robert sounded calm and casual, the way he always sounded. "Hey, Stephen, just calling to see how you're doing. Haven't heard from you in a while. Give me a call back when you get a chance. Talk to you soon." The message ended with a beep. Stephen stared at his phone in disbelief. He played the message again. It was definitely his father. The tone, the phrasing, everything was typical of how Robert left voicemails. But Robert had been dead for 3 days. Stephen had been at the funeral. He had seen the casket lowered into the ground. Stephen called his mother and asked if she had accessed his father's phone. She said the phone was in a box with Robert's other belongings. She had not touched it. Stephen asked if anyone else had. She said no. The phone had been turned off since his father's death. Stephen retrieved the phone from his mother's house. He turned it on. The battery was nearly dead. He charged it and checked the call log. The phone showed an outgoing call to Stephen's number on the day he received the voicemail, 3 days after Robert's death. But the phone had been turned off. It had been in a box. No one had used it. Stephen played his father's voicemail over and over. There was nothing unusual about it. No distortion, no background noise, just his father's voice, leaving a normal, everyday message.
the kind of message he would have left a dozen times before. But this message had been left after he died. Stephen did not know what to do with the information. He did not tell many people. He felt they would not believe him or would think he was fabricating the story to cope with grief. He kept the voicemail. He listened to it occasionally, especially when he missed his father. The normalcy of the message was comforting in a strange way. It made him feel as if his father was still around, still checking in, still part of his life. But it also disturbed him, because the message asked him to call back, to continue the conversation. And Stephen could not. There was no number to call, no way to reach his father. The message created an expectation that could never be fulfilled, a loop that would never close. Months later, Stephen was cleaning out his father's belongings when he found an old answering machine in the garage. Out of curiosity, he plugged it in. The machine powered on and displayed a blinking light indicating saved messages. Stephen pressed play. The machine cycled through several old messages, telemarketers, friends, family, and then his own voice from years ago, leaving a message for his father. "Hey, Dad, just calling to see how you're doing. Haven't heard from you in a while. Give me a call back when you get a chance. Talk to you soon." Stephen froze. The words were almost identical to the voicemail he had received from his father after his death. The phrasing, the tone, even the pauses. Stephen realized his father had mirrored his own words, either consciously or unconsciously, when leaving him that final message. But this realization did not explain how the message had been sent 3 days after his father's death. It only deepened the mystery. Had his father, in some way, recorded a message before he died, knowing Stephen would need to hear from him? Or had something else, some echo or imprint of his father's voice, created the message, using fragments of memory and habit? Stephen never found an answer. The voicemail remains on his phone, a message from the dead, asking for a callback that will never come. When the dead leave messages that sound alive, that ask for responses, that create the illusion of ongoing conversation, we are caught between worlds. We want to respond. We want to close the loop, but we cannot. The line goes only one way. They can speak to us. We cannot speak to them. There are cases where the voicemail is not heard by one person but by many, where the message spreads, is shared, is analyzed, and becomes part of a collective mystery. In October of 2012, a voicemail began circulating online. It was uploaded by a user on a forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The user claimed the voicemail had been left for his friend by the friend's deceased sister. The sister, named Melissa, had died in a drowning accident 2 months earlier. She was 19 years old. One evening, the friend received a voicemail from Melissa's old number. He played it and recorded it on another device before sharing it online. The voicemail is brief. It lasts 14 seconds. It begins with silence, then a voice. The voice is female, young, distorted. It sounds as if it's coming from underwater or through heavy interference. The words are unclear, but listeners have attempted to transcribe them. Most agree the voice says something like, "I'm still here. Can you hear me? I'm still here." The voice repeats the phrase twice. Then the message ends. There is no background noise, no indication of where the voice is coming from, just the words, distorted and faint, struggling to be heard. The user who posted the voicemail claimed his friend was deeply disturbed by it. He recognized the voice as his sister, though the distortion made it difficult to be certain. He had tried calling the number back, but it was disconnected. He checked with the phone company, and they confirmed the number had been deactivated after Melissa's death.
The voicemail was analyzed by audio experts and amateur enthusiasts. Some claimed the distortion was consistent with a voice transmitted through water. Others said it sounded like interference from a damaged recording device. A few insisted the voice was saying different words entirely, words that were even more disturbing.
Skeptics argued the voicemail was a hoax, that the user had created it using audio editing software and a recording of his friend's sister's voice. But the user provided phone records showing the voicemail had been delivered from Melissa's number. The records were verified by independent researchers who found no evidence of tampering. The voicemail spread across the internet. It was featured on podcasts, YouTube videos, and paranormal investigation shows. Thousands of people listened to it. Some claimed they heard additional sounds in the background: whispers, crying, water moving. Others heard nothing but the voice, repeating its message: "I'm still here." The friend eventually stopped responding to inquiries about the voicemail. He requested that the recording be removed from public forums, though copies continued to circulate. He never publicly confirmed whether he believed the voicemail was genuinely from his sister or an elaborate prank. But the voicemail exists. It can still be found online. You can listen to it yourself. You can hear the distorted voice. You can decide what you believe. But the fact remains that the voicemail was delivered from a disconnected number, that the voice, distorted or not, says words that suggest presence, awareness, and a desire to be heard. "I'm still here." A declaration of existence from someone who no longer exists. A message from a dead girl's phone reaching her brother, reaching the world, insisting on presence in the face of absence. The voicemail haunts because it is ambiguous. It could be real. It could be fake. We will never know for certain, but the possibility that it is real, that the dead can leave voicemails, that they can reach through disconnected numbers and distorted lines to tell us they are still here, is enough to unsettle anyone who listens. When a message spreads beyond its intended recipient, it becomes something else. It becomes a shared experience, a collective question. Are the dead truly gone, or are they still here, just beyond the reach of our perception, calling out to us, leaving messages we can barely hear? As we reach the end of these accounts, a truth emerges. The voicemails are not consistent. Some are silent, some contain words, some are comforting, some are terrifying. But they share one commonality. They arrive when they should not, from numbers that should not be active, in voices that should no longer exist. The people who received these voicemails were changed by them. Some found comfort in the messages, evidence that their loved ones persisted in some form beyond death. Others were traumatized, haunted by voices asking for help they could not provide, or by the sheer impossibility of what they had experienced. But all of them were left with the same question: how? How does a phone call originate from a device that has been destroyed? How does a voicemail send from a number that has been disconnected? How does a voice speak when the body that produced it is no longer capable of breath or sound? The technical explanations fall short: network delays, database errors, malfunctions. These explanations might account for one case, perhaps two, but they cannot account for all of them. They cannot explain the specificity of the calls, the relevance of the messages, the emotional weight they carry. And so we are left with other possibilities, possibilities that do not fit neatly into our understanding of how the world works, that the dead persist in some form, that they can, under certain circumstances, reach back into the world of the living, that technology, in its complexity and interconnection, has created pathways for communication that extend beyond the physical, that phones, devices designed to connect the living to the living, have inadvertently become bridges to the dead. Or perhaps the explanation is simpler and stranger, that messages can exist outside of time, that a voicemail left before death can arrive after death, not because of delay, but because time, for the dead, is not linear, that the moment of recording and the moment of receiving are not bound by the same rules that govern our experience. We do not know. We cannot know. The voicemails are evidence, but evidence of what we cannot say with certainty. They are fragments of an answer to a question we have asked for as long as we have been human. What happens after death? Do we continue? Can we return?
The voicemails suggest, yes, that some part of us, some echo or imprint or fragment, can reach back, can speak, can call the numbers we used to call, can leave messages for the people we loved. Whether this is comforting or terrifying depends on the message, depends on the voice, depends on what is said in those brief moments of impossible connection. If you have ever lost someone close to you, you understand the desire to hear their voice again, to receive one more message, one more conversation, one more chance to say the things you did not say. The voicemails offer that, but they also offer something else. Uncertainty, fear, the knowledge that the boundary between life and death is not as solid as we believed, that the dead are not as gone as we assumed, that they can reach us, whether we are ready or not. Consider your own phone, the voicemails saved in your inbox, the numbers stored in your contacts. Some of those numbers may belong to people who are no longer alive. You keep them because deleting them feels like erasing the person, like severing the last connection. And perhaps you are right to keep them, because if the accounts in this video are true, those numbers may still be active in ways we do not understand. Those voices may still be able to reach you. What would you do if you received a voicemail from someone you lost? Would you play it? Would you listen? Would you believe it was real, or would you convince yourself it was a glitch, a mistake, a trick of technology? And if you did believe it was real, what would it mean? That the person you mourned is still somewhere, still aware, still trying to communicate? Or that something else, something unknown, is using their voice, their number, their identity to reach you? The voicemails do not answer these questions. They only raise them. They give us evidence without explanation, connection without understanding, voices without bodies, and we are left to decide what we believe. The people in these stories made their decisions. Some kept the voicemails and cherished them. Some deleted them and tried to forget. Some shared them with the world hoping for answers. But regardless of their choices, they all carried the weight of the experience, the knowledge that they had heard the impossible, that the dead had spoken to them, that a line had been crossed and they could never uncross it. These voicemails exist. They are saved on phones, backed up in cloud storage, shared on the internet. You can hear some of them if you search. You can listen to the voices of the dead, distorted and faint, struggling to be heard. And when you listen, you will feel what the original recipients felt. The chill, the disbelief, the terrible, undeniable possibility that the dead are not silent, that they are speaking, that they are calling, that somewhere in the vast network of signals and frequencies that connect our world, there are messages waiting, messages from people who should not be able to send them, messages that arrive too late, or perhaps exactly on time. The next time your phone buzzes with a voicemail from an unknown number or from a number you recognize but should not, you may hesitate before playing it. You may wonder what voice you will hear, what words will be spoken, what message has been sent from beyond the boundary of death. And when you press play and the voice begins, you will understand what these people understood, that technology has given us more than connection to the living. It has given us connection to the dead. And that connection, once opened, does not close. It waits. It persists. It reaches through time and silence and the vast distance between worlds. The voicemails will continue. Somewhere right now, a phone is ringing, a message is being left, a voice is speaking that should not be able to speak, and someone, somewhere, will listen. and they will know, as you now know, that the dead do not always stay silent, that sometimes they call back, and when they do, they leave a message that asks a question we cannot answer, a message that offers comfort we cannot accept, a message that proves what we always suspected but never wanted to confirm, that the end is not the end, that the line is still open, that on the other side of silence there is still a voice, waiting, calling, speaking, and all we can do is listen.